public meeting of the Joint Commissioning Committee. Everyone's very welcome. I'm Councillor George Mills Hammond. I'm one of the co-chairs today. What I'd like to do first is ask what apologies we have today. I just noticed we haven't been joining. I think we may just be quorate now, which is good news. Can I ask if we have any apologies? Apologies given in advance, please.
I've had apologies from Councillor Mark Jones, Chair, John McElraith and John Doyle's with us today in substituting for him, and from Leslie Smith, and Brian Hughes is here substituting for Leslie. Thank you. Thank you all. Right, next we want to turn to the minutes of the last meeting that we had on 19th October 2021. If I just go through these page by page, and anyone just shout out, please, if you've got. Apologies, Chair. Before we move on to the minutes, are there any declarations of interest?
Oh, sorry, yes. No declarations of interest? Okay, fantastic. The minutes then of the 19th of October. I'll go through page to page. Please just do shout out if there are any matters of accuracy involved by page. Right. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. And page 8. Not hearing anything in terms of accuracy there. Before we look at the action log, just everyone pose that they are accurate minutes for anyone that was in attendance. No dissent from that. So if we turn to the paper B there, we've got the action log from meetings. Is there anything, I don't propose to go through them in detail, but are there any points anyone wants to raise on any of the actions that are within that log? I don't think there are too many things listed there that are going to require discussion at this point, but if anyone has anything, please do speak up. Right, thank you all. The first thing I want to do today is turn to Terry Hudson, our co-chair of the committee, really just to give the meeting a bit of an update on what is listed as the Integration Commissioning consultation, but actually, as people may have heard, there has now been a paper from the government come forward in response to the engagement paper that came at the end of last year. So if I turn to Terry now, please. Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, George. Good morning, everyone. I'm Terry Hudson, the co-chair of this committee and chair of Sheffield CCG. What I will do is just briefly give a bit of context to what this is about, because it has been a while since we met in public. So give a bit of context, give some information about the legislative proposals announced by the government last week in the white paper, and then consider some of the implications that may have for this committee. The background is that over the last few years, the NHS in South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw has been on a journey to working in a more joined up way to improve the care and outcomes of people living in South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw. And that has also been the case that we've been doing the same thing here in Sheffield. Now, one of the ways that the ICSs, so integrated care systems, have been developing is by forming strong partnerships in places. So the legislation talks about places, and for us, Sheffield is our place. The other places in South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw being Barnsley, Rotherham, Doncaster and Bassetlaw. So within our place, within Sheffield, our partnership is formed of a strong joint commissioning committee, which is this committee, and an accountable care partnership, which comprises the City Council, the CCG, Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, Sheffield Children's Hospitals, Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust, PCS and VAS, so Voluntary Action Sheffield, representing the voluntary sector. So the development of our places has been supported by the ICS and also supported by our partner organisations here in Sheffield. And the ICS has been brought together to ensure that places work together where it makes sense to do things once across the regional footprint. And some examples of that are stroke care, children's emergency surgery. So last week, the government published its white paper on the future of integrated care. And that does have some important implications for us as a joint commissioning committee. So I plan to take us through those now in turn. So the legislative changes have been brought about to help the NHS deliver on the long-term plan. Now, the NHS long-term plan doesn't just refer to health functions, but also refers to the integration with social care and more broadly population health. So the legislation claims, or at least is stated, that it provides some clarity on roles, but there is some flexibility within that. It considers that neither the NHS nor social care are able to address the challenges alone, and therefore integration is something that is required in future direction. It considers that there's two forms of integration, and those are important for us to consider here within this committee. So the first form of integration is between NHS organisations to improve the healthcare and reduce inequality. And then the second form of integration is between the NHS and local government. And that's the point where both of those things do have important implications for us. The white paper is broadly broken up into three themes. So the first one is working together and supporting integration. The second one is reducing bureaucracy. And the third one is a list of additional proposals. This committee, so the Joint Commissioning Committee here, is concerned with our pooled budget for health and care. And it is in essence an integration between the NHS and local government. So I plan to concentrate on those parts of proposed legislation that are pertinent to our work here. So the first one is around integrated care systems. So integrated care systems are proposed to be established as statutory bodies. And for Sheffield, that means that Sheffield CCG will be abolished, and the majority of our functions as commissioners will be delivered through the new statutory body, so the integrated care system. The ICSs, I'm going to use ICSs just because that's easier to say from now on, will also take on some of the functions that are currently undertaken by NHS England. So those could be things like local pharmacy contracts, opticians, dentistry, and some of that is yet to be decided. In terms of the governance of the integrated care systems, firstly, there will be a health and care partnership board, which will set the overall plan for South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw. And then secondly, there will be an NHS integrated care board, which will take on the commissioning functions that are currently carried out by the CCG and NHS England. But one of the important bits in the legislative proposal is the expectation that the integrated care systems will delegate commissioning function to places and or provider collaboratives. So place level partnerships are really key in the white paper, but there won't be any legislative provisions for how those place arrangements are enacted. So that does give us an opportunity here in Sheffield for flexibility in terms of how we wish things to move forwards. There will continue to be a central role for health and wellbeing boards in setting population health strategy and building a plan that reflects the joint strategic needs assessment, which we'll all be familiar with here in joint committee. So before the legislation changes, joint commissioning committee between Sheffield City Council and Sheffield CCG will continue to be the place where we do our joint commissioning. After the legislation, this committee could be the place where Sheffield City Council and the Integrated Care Systems Sheffield Place team will do its joint commissioning for Sheffield. So considering those legislative proposals, there are a number of implications that this committee will need to take on board and consider and work as we move forwards. So I think the first implication is it's important to recognise that neither places nor informal partnerships, entities to which an integrated care system could delegate its functions. So as things stand in our landscape at the moment, delegation that we have through our Section 75 agreements between the City Council and the CCG could remain the point of delegation in the future. This is important to us here in Sheffield. We'll be hearing a little bit later about our joint commissioning plans that reflect some of the huge progress we've made here in Sheffield. The joint commissioning we have here in Sheffield is one of the single largest examples of integration in our region. And as you'll hear later, we are confident that the integration that we've worked towards so far will serve people in Sheffield well going into the future. So with that in mind, the significant work undertaken here will ensure that in the future, decisions about care and services for people in Sheffield will remain in Sheffield. And I think that is an important part when we hear words like integrated care systems. Now, in terms of the flexibility for places to determine local arrangements, I think we will all recognise that as being something that's very welcome. Within the legislative proposals, there is scope for collaboratives of provider organisations such as hospitals, primary care networks, GP services, voluntary sector organisations to come together to take on accountability to deliver improved health outcomes for populations within a delegated resource. That is the point where we get the flexibility for innovation and how we make that collaborative model work best here in Sheffield. So I think the implication there is that that will be a large change programme for Sheffield over the next year or two. And as joint commissioners, we will need to explore what options we've got for provider collaboration here in Sheffield so that they can take on some of the delegated accountability. Now, this could be for broad areas, or it could be for more specific areas of those things that we currently commission in this committee, such as mental health, hospital discharges, hospital equipment, urgent care, and those will be things for us to consider moving forwards. As we begin to explore the appetite for that collaboration in Sheffield with our partners in our Accountable Care Partnership, we will need to kind of be clear that it builds on the work that we've got already and isn't trying to reinvent anything that's already in place. There is also significant work going on in our Integrated Care Partnership, which is looking at the operating model for places, looking at the development of integrated care partnerships between providers, some of the financial frameworks, the role of clinical leadership, workforce, and how commissioning functions will be discharged at the right level. Now, those things are all pieces of work that are in progress, and I propose that we bring updates on those to future committee meetings. So really, in summary, legislative proposals build on the existing progress we've made, and as we'll hear later, there is a huge piece of work and huge progress we've made on building up our joint commissioning plan. It also built on the work that we have been undertaking with our colleagues in the Accountable Care Partnership, but also in our integrated care system. I think reflecting on the legislation, there are some huge opportunities for us in Sheffield for how we can improve the experience of healthcare for people living here, improve inequality, and to meet some of the ambitions that are going to be sort of set out in the paper that's coming next. So I think the committee here is going to need to spend some time reflecting on the implications of legislative proposals, think about the implications of the work that's coming out from our integrated care partnership at system level, and also our accountable care partnership at place. And really, we need to now focus on how we best work with our partners, work with the public, and work with leaders across our city to ensure that we keep the right focus on those next steps. There are a number of other things that are in the legislation, some of them not immediately relevant to this committee. I am happy to provide a written update on some of those things if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Terry. That was a really helpful update. And before just inviting questions, I would just add that clearly at the moment there is a lot of work going on. You know, with people across Sheffield, and Terry is a massive part of that group, which is really looking to make sure that the system that gets set up in the Sheffield Place system in future, reflecting the national changes that clearly are the primary driver here, are absolutely the best for the people of Sheffield. And that is the only one thing we all have to keep in mind here, that is, how can we best organise health and care so that Sheffielders can get the best services as quickly as possible. But ultimately, it's got to be more than about simple services, doesn't it? It's got to be about how can that keep Sheffielders as healthy as possible for as long as possible, and to live really great, fulfilling lives in the brilliant city we live in. So ultimately, I don't really care what it can say nationally. That always has to be our focus locally, and we will make whatever we can. You know, we'll all have individual reactions to the changes nationally, some good, some bad, and we'll all have things to say about that, but we all need to work together to make sure that for Sheffield we get the best result. Can I see if there are any questions or brief comments for Terry there? Otherwise, we'll thank Terry for the update. Mark, please do ask a question or make a comment.
Okay, yeah. I'm still trying to get my head around the paper, which is interesting. I suppose I think there's a plan of work that this committee needs to engage with, but this committee in particular, because if our ambition is that in a year's time, something like this committee will still be bringing together the NHS and the local authority through, we need to give some thought to what might the membership of that committee look like. And I think we need to be developing our thinking about that. I think what is clear is that the sort of status, the role of people like myself and Lee will disappear because the CCG disappears, and indeed Terry. Well, that seems to be the case. I mean, there's a gap there, but we as a city need to think, well, what are the sort of voices that we might want to see around the table at a committee to help us drive forward an effective health and care system at a local level that works well with the ICS. And not that I've given a great deal of thought to this, but my worry is, and I speak as someone who's been around in this sort of world for far too long, is there are inevitably challenges when, for example, and I apologise to Brian and Jackie, I think, but but when you pull together, in particular, some of the big players in the system, like the hospital trusts, so the big NHS trusts in the city, it is very difficult for them to challenge each other because they've got to work with each other on a day-to-day basis. And also they're very, and rightly so, cautious about the subsidiarity that those individual organisations have. So I would argue that it's really important for a committee like this to have some voices on it who understand the health system and but at the same time are sufficiently independent to be able to bring some challenge, appropriate challenge, into the committee that represents an NHS, or at least is grounded, because I wouldn't claim to represent the NHS, but is grounded in an NHS point of view and an NHS experience. And I think that's one of the things that we need to wrestle with. And I can't think of any immediately obvious candidates, although, for example, Healthwatch, are an important player in the city, and it might be, as we have sitting on our CCG board, the chair of Healthwatch Sheffield, it might be that those are the sorts of things to consider. So I do think there's a piece of work for this committee to think about, if it is to continue to exist, and I think it should, then how to ensure that there's a grounded voice coming from the NHS that isn't just one that is tied into another mechanism of officers coming in and talking, because I think it's very difficult. As I say, I don't have to repeat the reasons why I've said that. I think the other thing is, in terms of the purpose of the committee that Terry touched on, is at the moment we're built to some extent, I hope this is right, around the opportunities presented by the Better Care Fund. I think there's one bit which is the financial responsibilities that the committee might have. But I would argue that the committee should not be constrained by that, because this becomes an important mechanism to think about how the integrated care system is working as a whole. So what I'm saying, Chair, is I think there's a piece of work this committee needs to do to sort of, because as Leslie Smith, who can't be here today, has said, Ben Terry has said, at the moment there's a permissive environment and we can create what we think will work best for Sheffield.
Thank you, Mark. I'll bring Brian in, certainly. I just think you're absolutely right that whatever we end up with in Sheffield, we absolutely need to increase the challenge to what we do, because for the biggest reason for that is that we know, in order to truly deliver the best results, we do need to change what we do. We do need to, in order to fulfill the health and well-being ambitions, we need to act massively on health inequalities, and absolutely, in order to change, we need that challenge. So I think absolutely we need to, in this committee and in so many other places, look at how we can ensure that the future system retains the right mix of people and actually increases that. It's not about just retaining what we have, it's about increasing it and trying to have the right people and understanding the city and understanding the system as best as possible. Unless Terry's got a comment, I'll bring Brian in. But if Terry wants to comment on what Mark says, I'll bring you in first before Brian.
Just picking up on the first point about the makeup of committee, the legislative proposal does give scope to places and points of delegation to decide the makeup of their own committees. So I think there is an important bit in there. And I know in the past we have given consideration and discussion to how this committee might look moving forward. So that's the first opportunity. I think the second thing is around the focus of the committee actually is broader than the Better Care Fund. The Better Care Fund is kind of a small proportion of what we're charged with here in the Joint Committee, but actually it's the delegated budget. So that delegated budget of around 480 million, I believe, into this committee, which is touching areas that are much, much wider than the Better Care Fund. So there's scope for us to potentially take on more in the future. There's scope for us to think about how we could delegate things off in the future as well. So that's just coming back on Mark's point.
Thank you, Terry. I'll bring Brian in, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of build on what Mark has been saying about the legislation, and for anyone that has been through previous legislation and previous change, the document as was published last week is light in detail, and therefore the ambition that I think this committee has in terms of where it wants to go to, the permissiveness, you use that word, Mark, from our accountable officer, Leslie, is clear in the document. And I think, you know, we've been on a journey as a committee. I would hope that what we would want to see, George, as you said, for Sheffielders, is a level of ambition of how we can address inequalities across the city, and particularly with the experience over the last 12 months of experiencing and living through a pandemic, and how our organisations, our partners and our citizens have come together to respond. So I wouldn't want to lose sight of that from the ambition when we started as a committee to where this could take us. So I'll just leave the word permissiveness hanging in the ether with that, and the opportunity for us to shape what we want for the citizens of Sheffield and the residents of Sheffield, I think is really important. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Brian. That's valuable. I think it probably is worth saying that whatever people may have, you know, gleaned or read about from the engagement paper, the white paper certainly does indeed you know, make it clearer that there is a lot to there is a lot to decide locally in terms that will be very important, and clearly the committee has a big role in that. So unless there are any, I can see Jackie's not got a hand up. Strange, Jackie, your hand is a different colour to anyone else's on here, so I almost didn't see it there. But yeah, Jackie, please do come in.
Yeah, just to say I'm very sorry about, apologies for being late, Chair. I just, and I'm sorry, I came in halfway through Terry's very good presentation. Echo everything everybody said, but I suppose one of the things, of course, that the white paper does stress that it's working together, and it's helping people to live longer lives, but longer, healthier, active and more independent lives. And as you read it, yes, there's some good things in it, but I think we've done tremendously. I would say this, but I think this board and the Health and Wellbeing Board has been great examples of partnership working across the city, and not just in the boards themselves or in the meetings themselves, but outside of the meetings. And I just wanted to say, I would hope whatever happens going forward with is it the new normal? I hate that word, the new normal, but you know, going forward, that actually we can retain that sense of all being in it together, and us all meaning all the people around this table, also all the people who are around the table in the Health and Wellbeing Board, and the citizens of Sheffield, the children, young people and adults, because it's for them, as everybody said. We want to make sure we get this right, and I think we can, and there are possibilities, but we'll have a lot of hard work getting there, because we can't afford to lose some of the great strides we've made over the last few years going forward in our partnership work. So thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Thank you very much. Is there anything else anyone wants to say on this? If not, I think really the real question we've had from that, a lot of valuable contribution, is from Mark about that, around what Mark considered, and I would suggest that we do use a development session of the committee to consider the challenge from Mark, what Mark said. And obviously things will develop quite quickly, but I think if we can try and do that, that will be good. And then hopefully the next public meeting, then things may go many ways, but we can report back on that and a number of other things, I think, really. So I think that would be really positive. Terry, do you want to come and conclude this item?
Oh, so it's a conclusion. That's caught me off.
You don't have to come to anything too
caught me off the hoof
definite.
ever so slightly there, George. No, I think what I'm hearing here is a continued ambition in this committee to continue to build on some of the great work that's been done already. And I think Jackie sums that up nicely, actually, in a real practical way of you know, what we've achieved through this committee. I would suggest with the future development sessions there are probably a couple of things for us to do. One of them, again, is to, as you've already mentioned, is to consider the membership of this committee. But I also think we need to consider how we best work with our partners in place and that system to consider what the scope of this committee will be moving forwards. And I think that's a real crucial element, is to be really clear on what our ambition is, what it is we wish to do, and how it is we will be working with other people to make sure that we integrate care, we improve people's lives, we help them live longer, and we help them live a longer proportion of their life in that healthy way.
Thank you very much, Terry. I noticed Jackie just got your hand up again. Do you want to just come in quickly there, Jackie?
So sorry, I forgot to put it down. Sorry, Chair.
Oh, no, no problem at all. Right, thank you all for that. So moving on, our next item is to hear about, we've got a presentation on the joint commissioning intentions, which we've got Sandy and John here. I don't know who's going to be presenting directly, but or someone's going to be sharing their screen. Take us through this presentation, then relatively briefly, and then we'll have some time for further discussion of more specific elements within this. So turn over to you, Sandy, is it first?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will lead the presentation, and I'm sure John will chip in where need be. I'm just going to share my screen.
That will be good, yes.
Can everyone see that slide deck?
Looks like it's working for me.
Great, thank you. So I'm presenting today the Sheffield Health and Social Care Plan that has been jointly developed by Sheffield CCG and Sheffield City Council, and details the commissioning priorities and the work that we're going to do together for 21-22. And if I could just take this opportunity to thank everybody who's been involved in producing this plan across both organisations. It has been a real feat to get us to this point for 21-22. So by having one joint plan, we've aligned the vision and objectives of the two organisations together, and very much flows into what everyone has already been talking about in the previous item, in working with you to make Sheffield healthier and helping you to stay independent, safe and well. So really brings together the two organisations' vision. And as part of the joint working, we've identified 6 priorities that underpin the work that we will deliver. And we'll be talking about that in more detail in terms of the commission intentions and the programmes. And this plan on a page just details some of the outcomes that some of those pieces of work will have an impact in. So by working together, we can make sure that Sheffield citizens have what they need to live full and healthy lives, and that is available to them. We will use their feedback and information that we collect to make sure the services are of high quality, safe and deliver what is needed, whilst we also manage the costs and get the most out from our money. By working together, we'll join our workforce and resources to focus on the delivery of the priorities, and we will listen to what is important to Sheffield population, and together with them make changes to health and care services that they use. We've identified our joint priorities. So obviously we're going through and continue to go through a pandemic. So we'll continue to respond to the demands that come with that pandemic. We will reduce health and social care inequalities across Sheffield. And by this, I mean ensuring that everyone has equal opportunity to access services and to ensure that they get the treatment and support that they need. We will focus on improving access to and availability of health and care services, and will ensure all children across Sheffield have the best possible start in life. We will improve the support and treatment for your mental health and well-being, and we'll make sure if you need health and care support, then this is personalised to your needs. And these have been the priorities within the Joint Commissioning Committee, aligning our joint work and really having that golden thread of reducing the impact of inequalities throughout all of the work that we intend to deliver. So these are our joint commission intentions, and each heading is one of our priority areas. Now, the Commission intentions are really quite broad, and underneath each and every one of them is a whole level of programme detail and work in terms of how we're going to deliver, what we're going to do, and what the outcomes will be in terms of the impact and what people can see in terms of changes. So that first one, which is tackling health inequalities within primary care and the community, really is the golden thread within all of our commissioning intentions and programmes of work, ensuring that all the pieces of work have an outcome that really does focus on how we reduce inequalities across Sheffield. So each of these priorities really do have that level of detail. In terms of our children, young people and families. These are just some examples of those particular areas, but very much have an overarching level of the overarching areas, and have that level of detail underneath in terms of what it is we're going to deliver. Our mental health and learning disability intentions, you'll have a set of slides in the next item on the agenda, which will really demonstrate that level of detail that comes under some of these headings. But in order to just give you some examples, the intention is to establish an all-age eating disorder service, improve access to 24/7 crisis services for children, young people and adults. So really focusing what we've identified as being important in each of the different priority areas. So what will be different? So we have been working on a number of these areas in previous years, and so we'll continue to improve and make better in the areas that are listed here. So health and care services that will prioritise your personal needs and circumstances in planning your care and treatment, services being provided in your community. If you or your child experiences a mental health problem, we'll ensure they receive the right care and support quickly. If you need support, your health and social care needs will be met in a joined up approach and the support offered as early as possible. If you have to go to hospital, we'll make sure you are discharged when you are ready and to the right place with the right support. And we'll make sure you get the right treatment and aftercare if you have an accident or in need of urgent support. So really bringing in together that joined up approach and integration of services, which is what we've been talking about for the meeting so far. We just wanted to highlight that in order to do this and deliver this, we will be working with the Sheffield people. So we will listen, engage with you in your community to understand specific needs and work with you to co-produce the redesign of services. That's really important in actually redesigning some of the services that people use and how we can meet expectations and make services better. We'll put support into the voluntary community and faith services, and if we would like help in terms of reviewing services and whether or not they're right. Again, making sure that we listen, engage and work with Sheffield people to really make sure that the services is what's needed and meets their needs. We'll also work in partnership with other healthcare and community organisations. So again, working with voluntary and community organisations, working with GPs and hospitals to ensure feedback shapes services, ensure the service you receive is high quality, safe and meets your needs. We'll monitor whether the services are delivering what's needed and work with others to change them if they're not. And we'll listen to health and social care providers to make sure they have what they need to deliver their services. So it really is making sure we engage not only with the Sheffield population to understand what's needed, but also helping to shape the delivery of those services, but with our providers and voluntary organisations. So that's the plan for 21-22, but that doesn't mean to say that everything that we've been doing so far is just going to stop. So we will continue to work together to meet the demands from the COVID pandemic. So supporting primary care and the whole of the Sheffield health and care system, supporting the COVID vaccination programme, supporting care homes and other frontline services to manage throughout the pandemic, and providing guidance and ensuring providers and workforce have adequate personal protective equipment during this time. We will continue to support our workforce across the organisations to ensure that they get the support for their well-being whilst we not only deal with the pandemic, but also support them in delivering what's needed for our commissioning intentions for next year. And obviously, as part of the Better Care Fund programmes that have started already and that continue to be in place, We will continue with those programmes of work, making sure they deliver what they set out to achieve and have the required impact. And what I wanted to end with was just to look back at 2021 and look at what it is that we have done together in that space. So again, I think it's been really important to note that most of 2020 has been meeting the demand of COVID pandemic, and we really have done that in an integrated way and worked together in dealing what's needed. We've brought social care and health staff together with GPs to provide a team around the person approach to support individuals, and it really has been that integrated working that has set us in really good stead in making sure that we can deliver what we intend to deliver in 21-22. We've worked with our mental health and acute hospitals to ensure services work together to enable discharge from hospital to home is supported by a rapid assessment to determine ongoing needs. And I won't go through all of these, but it really just lists what it is we've done together in that joined up space. So the joint plan has been brought to Joint Commissioning Committee in order to confirm the priorities and direction for 21-22, with the intention that at each meeting we will have a focused look on a priority area and the achievement of outcomes to ensure the programmes are having the required impact and are reducing the impact of inequalities across Sheffield. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sandy. It's remiss of me I forgot to say that since the last public meeting, Sandy, you've come into your current position, haven't you, as the CCG's Director of Commissioning Improvement? Is that the right title for you?
Director of Commissioning Development, yes, thank you.
Development, sorry, there we go. So I just wanted to note that and welcome Sandy, because I know that's the change in the last public meeting. So thank you for that. That was a I think really useful presentation of presenting where we've been in 2021, which we are just about still in, and going forward into the new world. I'm seeing Lee's got a hand up. Can I bring in Lee, please?
Thank you, and yes, thank you, Sandy. I mean, I've seen this various iterations of this plan a number of times, and each time I see it, it seems to get better, which is great, and I know it represents a lot of work. Really welcome the emphasis on addressing health inequalities, working together, and particularly the idea of co-production, so listening to people, understanding actually what's important to people who are using the services, and listening as we go along as well to make sure we've got it right. So that all feels great. It feels very innovative. So I've just got 2 points. One's just a point I wanted to raise, and one's a question. And again, it always feels really churlish to say anything when there's a lot of emphasis on health inequalities, but I just did want to say at one point, you said actually looking at health inequalities, it's mainly about ensuring everyone has equal access to healthcare. Later on in the presentation, you did sort of change the nuance of that slightly, because I think really we need to think about outcomes. It isn't just about everybody having equal access, it's the outcomes and understanding what the factors are that determine the health inequalities and perpetuate them as well. So we've got to be really focused on that, I think. And my question was, we're talking about changing the way that services are delivered, so a lot more closer to home, a lot more nearer to the patients or the clients, and my question is, do we know how prepared our partner providers are for these changes and how much buy-in there is? Because it's going to be a huge challenge to change those sort of services, particularly to have more in the community. And just thinking about, we may even be thinking about disproportionate funding, increasing funding to increase need, and even in primary care, we know that actually that could be a bit of a challenge. So just to get a bit of a sense really of where our partner providers are at in this, and whether they're anywhere near the same sort of space that we're in at the moment.
Thank you, Lee. So first, in terms of saying inequalities, I'm bringing back to the committee an outcomes framework, which will demonstrate what it is we're trying to do in terms of reducing the impact of inequalities. So there's a number of levels, again, a number of different aspects, but absolutely it's not just about access and waiting times at all. It is about a different level of monitoring angles, and which will include a whole outcomes framework which underpins all of our commission intentions and the commissioning plan. So completely get that, and apologies that may have come across differently in the presentation. In regards to your question, the plan itself, the commission intentions, we do have links with our providers in the development of the programmes of work. And so they will come with us on their journey in terms of changing the way services are delivered. In terms of what that endpoint will look like, they will obviously help with that shaping of it. But I think at this point, it's about recognising what services are needed and collecting that feedback and engagement with the Sheffield population, understanding that, and then working with our providers. But I think the white paper that was discussed, I think everyone has got the intention of what can we do together for the people of Sheffield, and I think everyone's on board with that notion.
Brilliant. Can I now ask Terry to either comment or ask a question? Thank you.
Thanks, George. So just want to start by recognising this is a significant piece of work for both Sheffield CCG and for Sheffield City Council. It's the first time that we've had such a broad-reaching joint plan, and I think that is something that's commendable and demonstrates the maturity of relationships between our organisations, but people who are working on the ground to be able to deliver that joined up integrated planning. So first thing is just recognition of the significant strides we've got. The second bit is really sort of a question for the committee rather than Sandy. But it is an extension of Lee's question there, which is, from my perspective, having an integrated plan is superb. We've got an integrated plan, but what we need to do now is to make sure that we're able to enact that plan, enable our provider partners to be able to deliver on some of those ambitions. And I think there is something for us as a committee now to consider. Are there any new ways in which we should start working with our provider colleagues to be able to deliver this? And in specific, I'm thinking around what mechanisms in terms of contract, in terms of delegating accountability, and in terms of delegating resource should we be thinking about in this committee? Because if we go down the routes that we've always had, which is a single contract to a single provider, we are likely to continue getting more of the same into the future. So I do think we need to be ambitious in terms of thinking about alliance contracts, in terms of collaboratives with delegated resource. With that resource comes delegated accountability. And I think we've really got to think smart now about how, as a committee, we can support and enable our providers to come into that space.
Thank you, Terry. Any responses to that at all from anybody? And otherwise, I'll bring in Mark, please.
I just want to go back to, and I agree with what Sandy said, that everybody's on board with regard to recognising the importance of health inequalities, and I think that was in response to Lee. But I think it also relates, I think, to what Terry was saying, which is, I do think that there's a greater comfort in the local authority about saying, well, and it's partly comes from local government's autonomy. And I know it doesn't feel like that for you lot in local government, but you are more autonomous than we are in the NHS. And so to be able to say, well, yeah, we see there's some real challenges in the city around inequalities. We've got some money here. We'll make decisions about how we allocate that. Whereas I think in the NHS, even though everybody, I'm sure, agrees that inequalities is very important, there sometimes tends to be a view which is, well, unless central government can identify some specific funding that actually enables us to address health inequalities, I'm not talking about the CCG here, this is more of a provider issue. We've got a range of things that we are contractually required to do that we need to go ahead and address. and therefore it's going to be very difficult for us to change that, because basically you're looking at shifting resources from one place to another. And I do worry that the creation of the integrated care system, and Matt Hancock telling us that now central government is going to be much more accountable for the NHS locally and for what it does and doesn't do, actually risks reinforcing that behaviour. Because it would reinforce a view, well, if they aren't allocating some money, then we don't need to change currently how we work. And so I'm not offering any magic wand to solve that problem. But what I am saying is I do think it was, because in terms of how we going forward manage that, seek to manage that and create mechanisms. And some of those might be through what Terry is talking about, which is more explicit local contracts with the NHS funding that is within our gift, about how that is, we expect that to be used.
Thank you for that, Mark. Is there any particular response to Mark's point there? If not, I'm not seeing any more hands at the moment. I think one thing to keep in mind as we go forward with this is, and as we get to the goal that we've been long seeking about, a deeper integration of our plans, is to ensure that we don't lose in any area of our commissioning and our practice the flexibility to respond to the core needs of the people of Sheffield, especially as we still are really uncertain times with COVID, and that we make sure that embedded in this is still our ways of working together that are really nimble and able to be flexed as effectively as we would is working in our own organizations, because so many times we see we see the arguments for working in silos. Not that anyone ever makes that as a proactive argument, but actually, if we keep all the control ourselves, we have the ability to change plans and respond to what we need. What we really need to do is retain that power to really be flexible and be proactive in that. It'd be good to get some reassurance that going forward, that we can really make sure that not only plans that really well integrated at that strategic level, but absolutely understanding the pressures in health and in and that the council has, so that actually those pressures and that need to change when that's needed, the power to act and that can be enhanced, not hindered, by working together in this way. Unless there's any particular response on that, I'll also bring Jackie in, I think, for the final hand for the moment. But then I'll ask Sandy to just say any final words if she wants to. Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just thanks very much to Sandy and John and everybody that's been involved in putting this together. I think it's really good. I just wanted to add really to what you said, Chair, in answer to oh God, sorry, my head's gone. Mark said, just to say, I suppose I understand that, and we've had this tension, haven't we, between what the big providers have to provide and they have money to provide and to make sure they achieve their outcomes. I suppose for me, the way we try and move to shift that money, and we've seen it in Sheffield a little bit, if you think about those taking people out of hospital into the community sooner than later and the work we've done on that, I suppose, as if our priorities mirror the same priorities of our providers and help those providers to deliver their other priorities, then potentially we'll all be backing these outcomes, because they will help all of us in other areas. So I suppose I'm just I'm feeling Pollyanna-ish at the moment. You can tell, can't you? I'm feeling that, this is a good place to be in at the moment, because it's such a negative place we're all in at home on our own, sitting in our loft or, you know, Zooming and not actually speaking to our friends and families and feeling that we're never going to get to the end of it. But I suppose I'm trying to be positive in the way I think about this. And I understand completely what Mark's saying. It is difficult when providers have pressures, or when the council have pressures, when the CCC, we all have pressures on us to deliver certain things. And sometimes we have to look and work together in partnership and know we will get those delivered. And at the same time, we can deliver other things and we'll get those things we need to have delivered in a better way. So again, I just feel as though I'm being Pollyanna at the moment and putting a rosy tint on everything, but I'm not, when I say that, not recognising the enormity of this task. It is difficult, but I know that there's a will, and while there's a will behind it, that's much better than when we're fighting. And I believe at the moment we're not fighting, we shouldn't be fighting, and we won't be fighting. Following COVID, what we've seen during COVID as well, with the NHS coming together with VCF, with the council, with the police, with the communities, coming together to deliver all the things that have been delivered during this time. If we can do that now, if we can harness it and do things quicker, you know, going back to Terry's point, will we get it done? You know, well, we can do, we can get through this, we don't have to be bogged down by how we do things, do we? So I really do think that, and I really think this is the way forward, and I really look forward to seeing you all do it. Really well done, everybody. Thank you. Sorry, Chair. Thanks.
No, thank you, Jackie. And I mean, I don't think you are being Pollyanna-ish, although that term is used a lot nowadays in civic discourse, I think, because of the way things are going. But I think we do need to be cautious, and I think there is a key point there about how we absolutely have to make, if this is to work, it has to work with providers and on both of our terms, because ultimately, although the council is a provider of services, ultimately this is about, you know, two commissioners, and there will still be, you know, commissioners on two sides of the divide, whatever happens in the future, within health and within social care. Commissioning, I believe, is a really, really powerful tool, but it has to be really, really well linked into ambitions and deliverables in providers. So I think we have to really look how it works and communicate what we're doing here as far as we can and as well as we can with providers. Right, I'm not seeing any more hands. I mean, I'll give Sandy a kind of right to sum up if you'd like to, but you don't feel you need to say anything more than, or John, of course, that you don't need to do.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think Councillor Drayton really summarised that very well, so thank you for that. I'll just confirm, so the ask was to confirm the priorities and direction with the committee, so I'm hearing that is the case. And to really say, you know, we're in a really strong position in having this joint plan, having a united commission within Sheffield, and working collaboratively with our providers in delivering what's needed for 21-22, and that work will be ongoing. And to be honest, I'm looking forward to bringing back each step of that way through that plan back to the committee to demonstrate what we have done together and with our providers as well. So John, do you want to have the last word?
Just thank you to JCC for your support, and I think, as Jackie said, where there's a will, you know, that'll go a long way in establishing a place-based approach, and this is a cornerstone of that approach in Sheffield.
Thank you both. And what I want to say also is that, you know, in the background, it wasn't so long ago, and we are still sadly in the depths of the big health crisis, but when that was going on, and naturally some of that long-term development on many things for the city in health, you know, were not people's first priorities. What we said as a committee is it really still is our priority. We can't just stop this. We have to bring this forward, and everyone involved, particularly Sandy and John and everyone that you work with, have really responded to that. And I think that puts us in a better position than we could have otherwise been. And so we can have confidence, whatever the future situation might look like with health nationally and in Sheffield, that we have a really, really strong starter plan. And more importantly than what the plan says, it's about the relationships that build that plan and the intentions of how we are going to keep building that. Because it doesn't so matter what we say in 21, 22, it's what we're saying in 22, 23 and going forward, because we know that it takes time to make real change. And that's what really matters. So thanks for involved, and we will definitely return to this. There's no two ways about that. We will return to this many, many times, because this is the core work we'll be doing, which is really driving integration. So thank you all. And actually, very well leading on, as the report outlined, there are clear areas of focus, and we're not going to cover every area of focus today because we'll be here for a very long time. And what we've asked is for particularly mental health to be looked at today in a bit more detail, because naturally that slide set for good reasons was quite top level. So next we're going to bring in Sam from the council and Heather from the CCG to talk. I think we've got a presentation and talk to us about the mental health commissioning intentions in a bit more detail and take us through some things. So a hand up to Sam and Heather, please. Welcome both.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everybody. Sandy, I'm led to believe that you can continue sharing your slides. If that'd be really helpful, if you can, great. So yes, just by way of introduction, folks, so I'm Sam Martin, Head of Commissioning at the Council. Heather is here too, and she's going to help us. We're going to go through these two slides together for you. So yeah, as the chair sort of introduced, what we were asked to do as part of the process around working up the joint commissioning plan is looking at in more detail at the area around mental health, along with a couple of other areas. Mental health's an area we've already done quite a lot of joint working in the past, but I think it's fair to say we've never actually had a set of completely signed off joint commissioning intentions for a particular year or a sort of 2-year period. So it's the first time that we'd really sort of knuckled down and tried to do this, and a really good exercise in bringing our commissioning teams together around what are our shared interests in terms of an area of work like mental health. So what we're doing today is presenting you with some headlines, but again, there's lots of detail that will fit underneath this in terms of actions. But I guess for the purposes of today, we're going through some of the big headlines. And what we've tried to do is distill down into these actions everything across the NHS commissioning, social care that the council is responsible for, the work that we might be doing around prevention and early help, and importantly, take an all-age approach so that we're not taking a separate approach to children's mental health that we are with adult mental health. We're trying to see this in the round as part of a whole system set of commissioning priorities. We've done quite a bit of work co-producing some of this stuff with different partners over the course of the last 6 months to a year, even in lockdown. So a lot of the work around crisis care, we've done a lot of workshops and co-produced a lot of work with people with lived experience, with voluntary groups, with community representatives. And I guess the stuff we're presenting to you today isn't an exhaustive list. It's only a couple of slides. There's also obviously a lot of business as usual we do in terms of our commissioning work with our key providers, both in the NHS and in the voluntary sector. And so there's loads of stuff that won't be on this list, of the stuff that we're just getting on with all the time. What we've tried to focus here is the kind of areas where we know we need to develop, or there's new investment going in, or there's new stuff happening. One thing I think that we're taking for granted here is that COVID hangs over all of this, both in terms of the current delivery and our thinking about the future. Mental health is one of the areas where COVID has sort of cast a big pall over the whole area, and we don't know yet quite how that plays out in terms of demand, in terms of impact on people. We've got some really good ideas about how it might work out, but actually which groups are going to be most affected it's not really certain yet. So we're trying to make sure we're keeping a watching brief on all that as we go and respond accordingly. So just in terms of the priority areas for mental health, we've sort of distilled things down to a whole set of sort of key broad areas. The first is improving and supporting children and young people's emotional well-being and mental health. And note, we say emotional well-being and mental health, so this isn't just about specialist treatment services or inpatient facilities for kids that need it, and there are those, and we need to focus on those as well, but we're also very interested in that preventative agenda, how we're supporting schools, how we're supporting youth services and communities and families to support the well-being of their children and young people in our city. really focused at the moment on developing mental health services that are connected into primary care and community services. So that whole conversation we're having as part of that previous item and the slides that Sandy was showing at broad level, so that people can get access to services and support much earlier, closer to home, through their GP, through other services that may have contact with in their local area. That's a really important part of both the long-term plan for the NHS and from a council perspective, a really big priority for us in terms of supporting communities. So linked to that, we're wanting to expand and improve our early help and prevention services. We already have an existing programme which we've been really successful at delivering around developing primary care mental health services, with voluntary sector groups involved, GPs involved in that, and our secondary care services collaborating on developing that new approach. And we're hoping to really grow that quite quickly as a city and go further and faster than the long-term plan would say we had to, and what other areas are doing. A big priority around crisis care. We know we've got some improvements to make in crisis care for people, and we've got some emerging plans around alternatives to going to A&E. We've got plans for some safe space facilities for crisis buddy type provision that provide an alternative to people than getting an ambulance or going to A&E when they're in need, particularly out of hours, because that's an area where we know we've got some gaps. We've got a big focus on, as well as all the preventative stuff and the crisis stuff, people who just need care and support, people who have a treatment need or need social care, ensuring that they can get the support they need to live happier and independent lives. So really expanding our recovery focused approach to the system so that people are supported to move from, whether it's inpatient care or residential care, where they can, to more independent and fulfilled lives, which we know we've been really successful with in some projects in the last few years. So wanting to grow that kind of approach. We've got a big focus in the city on improving physical health of children, young people and adults who've got severe mental illness, as well as people with learning disabilities. It's a really big gap nationally that often people who have got diagnosed severe mental illness or learning disabilities, their physical health needs are often neglected when they turn up with physical health needs. Quite often that might be undiagnosed or assumed to be part of their mental health condition or part of their learning disability. And we know that's an issue nationally, that's not just for Sheffield, but we have a particular programme of work that we're wanting to grow and expand on this year, which is around ensuring physical health checks can be done and that people get access to physical health care where they need it. We've got a whole pathway that we're implementing this year around which is an all-age pathway for children, young people and adults with eating disorders. That's been a really, really good piece of work in the planning that needs to be implemented this year. We've got a whole range of partners on board with that, including voluntary sector organisations and the NHS. And we want to continue to focus on some particular vulnerable groups, which is not an exhaustive list here, but that includes groups like asylum seekers who have often arrive in the city with really severe mental health needs, particularly around post-traumatic stress, and even if they're not eligible for some public funds, they have healthcare needs that we need to provide. We've done a whole load of really great work in the city around supporting rough sleepers over the last year, particularly when COVID hit. And we really want to build on that in terms of getting treatment and support to those people in that cohort that need it, who often are very on the margins of society and often don't get the support that they need. We've got that opportunity and had that opportunity while they've been often housed in hotels. Nurses have been able to get to them and provide support that they need, and we want to make sure we can build on that. Obviously, what COVID's given us is a need for more bereavement support, and we've had some particular services set up as part of the COVID response, which we need to ensure grow and continue, including widening access to those through sort of phone lines and digital channels, the people that need that. And problem gamblers is another area where, in terms of mental health, there's been a lot of focus over the last few years, and we've got some projects, or a project that's been looking at the needs of problem gamblers and how that tips into mental health conditions and suicide, etc. So a whole bunch of projects there that are focusing on particular groups that we know have got issues with access to services or particular needs that haven't been met as well in the past. Heather, do you want to talk us through the next slide, Sandy, if you could move us on?
Yeah, so I think just before I do that, I'd just like to comment on on Councillor Drayton's, what you described as Pollyanna, I think I described that as our commitment to working together, because we do believe we can make a difference. The Sheffield Psychology Board, as an example of some of that integrated work and cooperation across sectors, has been shortlisted for Health Service Journal Award. And it's been an absolute privilege to work alongside colleagues from all sectors, working with a wide range of client groups across all ages to really cooperate and collaborate together to deliver things jointly. So, for example, outreach work to care homes, outreach work to other frontline staff, to mortuary staff, to children and young people. That kind of coordination work, I've never seen such positive examples in most of my career of organisational agnosticism, where people have just rolled the sleeves up and worked together to try to make sure that they are delivering for people on the front line. So that's been really positive work. So in terms of what will be different, I think that really, COVID's given us an opportunity, I think, to sort of take down some of those operational and organisational divides and to start to actually just focus in on what will make a difference. So some of the differences, it is that sort of access to early support. What we're hearing across the country is that what we're expecting is a 40% surge in mental health conditions as a result of COVID. And when we look at some of the work from Manchester, from the arena bombings, they're talking about that kind of 3-year gap and effect after an event. So if we think about COVID, it's been with us for a year already, and we don't really know how long it's going to be with us further, then I think we need to be thinking about mental health increases for quite some time to come. As Sam has just alluded to, the primary care mental health offer will be available across the city. Sheffield's been an early implementer for the primary care mental health service, and we've seen about 1,000 people who previously would not have been seen by the care trust as a secondary health provider. So that is picking up, if you like, that unmet need between primary care and secondary care. So that is one of the kind of main focuses that we've been having as a team. We were an early implementer site, one of 12, and we've just been given the news that it looks highly likely we'll be given additional money from NHS England to extend that across the city. So that's very positive. We want more people to be able to receive those appropriate psychological therapies. So in addition to what I've just described from the primary care mental health offer, the access to some of those psychological therapies available through, for example, Sheffield IAPT, where people are actually able to book on directly now, which is again a progress since COVID, directly book in for group sessions, for individual sessions, and we'll be extending that offer across the city in the next year too. More vulnerable children receiving CAMS support. We're very aware that our CAMS service needs further investment and further attention. We're working with our colleagues in children's services to look at the offer around learning disability in adults. So that's our colleagues that have been working on the neurodevelopmental pathway, but also looking at what support that we can offer locally to try to prevent admissions into those tier 4 beds that NHS England commission. And it has to be said that that is a pressure in the city in terms of, and it's a national pressure in terms of the gaps in tier 4 CAMS beds, which the whole country is experiencing. And what we're trying to do is work in the system, as Sam said, on improving some of the crisis responses. Very positive recently, and again, coming back to Jackie, what you said about working with the voluntary sector, we had an opportunity to bid for some money to NHS England, and we chose to do that in partnership with the voluntary sector mental health collaborative, and got together 8 interested voluntary sector organisations to help us write the bid and to submit jointly on that basis. And I'm pleased to say that we've been successful in being allocated 3 years funding for, as Sam was just describing, those crisis buddies. So that kind of work on crisis response, what we're trying to do is work across the Children's Hospital, the Care Trust, the local authority, ourselves and the voluntary sector to coordinate that response better, and that's through some of the crisis transformation work that we're doing. We have been successful in moving people from residential nursing care into their own homes. And that's sort of a fairly dull headline in many ways, but actually when you look at what it means behind it, that means people have got much more choice and control of their lives and where they live, and they've got security of tenancy. So that actually is a massive achievement for individuals in terms of their life and their quality of life and choices available to them. From a transforming care point of view, for example, we've been the most successful in the country in South Yorkshire, and Sheffield's played a big part in that, in moving people with learning disability out of very long stay institutional hospital care. And we feel that we've done some really good work around this, around mental health too. More young people and adults into employment. We know that there's a link between unemployment and mental ill health, or poor employment and mental ill health. And again, Sheffield's had some great work with a national randomised controlled trial called Working Win, which has so far the government, even though the randomised controlled trial isn't yet published, they're already saying we want to invest in this. And so we've been able to extend that longer into the city, and some really positive outcomes for individuals there. More to be done, and I suspect the pressures around loss of jobs is going to carry on biting, of course, into this next year, so it becomes really important. Sam talked about physical health. We are doing a lot of work on annual health checks for people with severe mental illness and for people with learning disabilities. There's a way to go on this, and we need to increase our performance in that in the city. We're trying some innovations again with the voluntary sector partners in order to try to use different approaches to the ones that we've used in the past. And I guess the kind of ultimate word really comes back to carers and families, and particularly those people that are experiencing support to people with mental health conditions. And what we really want to be different is that they report a better experience when they're using those services. We're about to relaunch the Mental Health Collaborative. There has been a gap in the city. We have a Learning Disability Partnership Board, an Autism Partnership Board, but the Mental Health Partnership Board was kind of put on pause while we refreshed that and reviewed that, and we are about to just relaunch that. So that will give people a much better opportunity to give us feedback and to voice their experiences to us. So I suppose really to come back to the sort of analysis that Jackie said, there's a lot to be done. We're up for the challenge, and I think we're working really well across partner organisations. And I'd extend an invitation to Sheffield Psychology Board to anyone that would like to sit in on that, because it really is a joy to behold, to see how people are just kind of getting on and working to support each other across the voluntary sector, the NHS and statutory partners and the local authority. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, both Sam and Heather, for taking us through this. I see Brian's hand up. I'd make a quick kind of question or comment first before bringing others. Just do it like that, if that's okay. It's really good to see that there's stuff within this which is looking at people's physical health and employment and training, and the sides of mental well-being, which are about those core underlying factors. I just want to view to how far you feel that by integrating these budgets still further, and as noted, this is an area where clearly we've been working in an integrated way for some time, that we can really try and get what I might describe up the food chain with making those investments to make Sheffield, not just in terms of those really cool things like employment and training and health interventions that are right, they're going to help protect people with mental health, but actually, you know, those investments in the fabric of the city. And it, you know, to what extent do you think that this kind of this kind of integration can help us focus on that more? Because I always do feel that the day-to-day nature of spending and budgets in both local authorities and the NHS really does make making those changes about the kind of how mentally healthy the infrastructure of the city allows us to be is a really cool thing, and I'd be really interested in, it's not so much what's going to be happening in 21-22 delivery, but how we can start using more integrated arrangements to really start setting the groundwork for that. You don't need to respond straight away. I'm happy to respond. You can do, but in sort of summing this up, you can respond now if you want, or else I'll bring, I've got 3 different hands up at the moment.
Well, if I'll make a brief comment, George, because
Sure.
I think your point's a really good one. I think you've got to be, having been around the joint commissioning world for a little while in different incarnations, I guess myself, I think it's just a note of caution about where you cast, how wide you cast the net, and then how easily you can manage, if you like, your resources. So I think one of the challenges, if you think about employment, for example, or leisure and parks and environment and countryside, we know like having great access to parks and outdoor space is really good for people's mental health. But I don't think you would want to sort of lump your kind of the budget that council spends on environment, street scene and parks and countryside in with the mental health services budget, if you see what I mean. Now, what you end up doing is casting a really wide net, and then that becomes quite difficult to manage. I think what we need to do is be thinking about the system and the fact that, and acknowledging that all those sort of core things that build strong societies and communities are all essential for people's mental health. But there's an interface point where I think like projects like the Working Win, for example, which do then connect mental health services to employment and support services around particular groups, are probably where the best place to put your resources are. Otherwise, I think your mental health budget gets lost in the sort of a massive big budget, which is all about the kind of the wider life of the city, which is all important stuff. So I think some of it is about each partner acknowledging, I guess, which bits they're mostly responsible for, but also where the kind of the overlaps are, which is, I guess, where the JCC comes in to play, because that's where you're trying to sort of patrol that boundary a bit and keep a handle on where are we really, really working together, as opposed to assuming the other one's just getting on and doing the bit that they would expect it to do anyway.
Thanks, Sam. That's really helpful. Heather, do you want to also comment on that point? Yes.
Well, I guess this is where our joint commitment to a mental health strategy development for the city can start to articulate some of the things you're talking about. And certainly, if you talk to psychological wellbeing practitioners in the city, they're very keen to promote the notion that it's okay not to feel okay at the moment. Everybody is impacted by this pandemic. It doesn't mean that we're all going to become seriously unwell, mentally unwell, but that there's things that we can do to maintain our mental health. And that sort of psychological first aid approach is perhaps an important one for us to take, and that we're starting to look at how we can actually roll that out to, say, for example, employers. So John Lewis have had some training. A number of other organisations across the city have asked for some psychological wellbeing. So it's how we actually support frontline workers within our communities and within our workforces as well. But I think there are some opportunities for us to think broader than just mental ill health. I agree.
Thank you very much for that, Heather, as well. We've got 4 different hands up now. Can I first bring in Brian, please?
Yep. Thank you, Chair, and I'll be really brief. And I just want to thank Sam and Heather for what you've taken today, because to me, I know, George, you introduced them both with their respective organisations, but what I love is this is integration and this is commissioning. So it brings to life the plan. And I know you've had a bit of a head start in mental health, but it's really reassuring to see how the language you both use is so complementary and common across what you do. So I'd like to thank you for that. And the other bit, which I think is really powerful, is breaking down those barriers between physical and emotional health is really clear in that plan. Plus, and thank you for doing it, looking at it from an all age basis. So this isn't just thinking about adult services or children's services. This is thinking about that whole lifespan. And I think this is where the potential of us being a strong joint commissioning committee can really start to add value, because it cuts down some of those traditional barriers that we may have seen 5 or maybe even 10 years ago in terms of that true integration and thinking of things from an all age and from a physical and emotional sort of basis, including the range of providers we've got in it. So I'd just like to compliment you both in what you've taken. So well done.
Thank you, Brian. I'm sure it's much appreciated. Lee?
Thank you. And yes, thank you to Sam and Heather. It was a really great presentation. And as always, in the interests of time, I'm going to focus on my question rather than my effusive praise, which you just have to accept that that's there. Really welcome, you know, this is such a prime area for joint commissioning, as we've already said. So many factors impact on mental health and mental well-being. Really welcome the emphasis on children, early intervention, preventative work. All of that is going to have such a fantastic impact in the years to come. But of course, my question is, how do we feel that the business as usual is going? Because from a GP's point of view, that is a massive, massive issue. And if I talk to GPs around the city, everybody's feeling the same. And we know that pre-COVID, there was already a 40% increase in demand with no increase in supply or capacity. So that was before COVID. During COVID, I think the sort of business as usual community mental health teamwork has been very, very difficult. And we know that the demand is going up still further, and then it's likely to go up beyond that. Really, really welcome the primary care mental health teams, but we know that they're actually meeting a lot of previously unmet need. So they're not going to be the whole answer either. So really, it was just to get a bit of feedback on how we feel about the capacity in the community mental health teams at the moment is, and what is the feeling for how they're meeting the need at the moment and how they're likely to meet the ongoing need as we come out of the pandemic.
Thank you, Lee. Do you want to respond to that briefly?
Yes.
Thanks.
So we have that concern, we share that concern, Lee, and I guess in terms of what are we doing about that, so every bit of money that we can bid for against the long-term plan nationally, we are bidding for. We're also working with the Care Trust around some of their kind of redesign that is necessary. So through things like the Crisis Transformation Programme, we've put some additional money into the crisis teams, but it's how that starts to play through the system. And of course, one of the issues that we face again nationally as a problem is workforce. So the Care Trust have been looking at innovative roles around clinical assistant psychologists rather than clinical psychologists, who are rare. And the same applies around psychiatry and community nursing posts. We do know that we're going to have to be doing things slightly differently. And I think this is where the voluntary sector partnership provider opportunities will really help us to meet that demand. But I can't shy away from the fact that the demands were there. We know that the Care Trust has gone through a very difficult period with their CQC report and a rebuilding from a fairly low base. So it is still a very challenging time. And that whole sort of parity of esteem issue still plays through nationally through the system.
Thanks for that response there, Heather. I'll bring in Terry for a comment now, please. Terry Hudson.
Thank you, George. So firstly, recognise significant strides again in this piece of work and some of the significant integration work that's happened already. I think that is welcome for patients, it's welcome for people in our city, and welcome for clinicians. And I'm going to do a but here, and this one maybe extends a little bit on Lee's question, and the GP in me is surfacing here in terms of advocating for our patient populations. So I think you've framed the future as they're going to be increased demand from COVID, and as Lee has pointed out already, there is we're already on increased demand pre-COVID. So the question is really around some of the core services that we offer. So we know that our patients still face significant waits to see mental health professionals, and some of that is reflected in workforce issues. But also there is still areas where people in Sheffield fall between the gaps in services. And I think in part of that is because we have got lots of integration with, between mental health services and other parts of our health and care system, as you've articulated. But at times, sometimes it seems the mental health services are not integrated between themselves. So you can refer somebody to a community mental health team and receive a letter back saying, please refer them here or please refer them there. And I just wonder whether there's anything in our commissioning intentions around improving the integration between the different silos of our services that we've got, as well as between organisations.
Thank you.
That's helpful, Terry. Is there any more comment on Terry's point?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Terry, and it's a concern that certainly if Steve Thomas was here, he would share with you, and we also share. I think part of the reframing of SHSC as an organisation through different leadership will start to address some of this. What we're trying to do is make sure that when we've got the programme, say, for example, the Primary Care Mental Health Initiative, that we've not got them looking over here, but still looking left when, for example, they're thinking about the community mental health team. So we're trying to kind of get them to pull that together. There are challenges around that I can't deny. For example, if you have autism, you're referred to one part of the system. If you have a crisis in your mental health, you might be supported elsewhere. And it is how they work as an organisation across the team. I don't think we've put something explicit in the commissioning intentions. That doesn't mean that we couldn't, and that's something that we can consider, Terry, thank you. I suppose it is, though, part of the business as usual conversations that we have through contract management group and contract management board and quality committees, that I think we need to continue to press with our providers. And the same for the Children's Hospital, where I think even more so they've got a divide between physical health and mental health, because they offer both. So that's certainly something we can take back to think more about as a team, Terry.
Thank you for that, Heather, and thank you, Terry, for your question. And now just got Jackie, and I'm going to close the list there if that's all right, because we are a little bit behind time, and I really have to be we have to really be done on time. Jackie, please.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly, Chair. I won't, same as Lee, I won't say how. Thank you very much. Welcome that. But just a couple of things. Echo everything both Lee and Terry have said. I would say the same too. I'm really pleased children and young people and adults are all involved in this, and it's all there. But I do think we've got some problems with the existing systems, and I would say that in CAMS, for instance, and also in our MAPS services as well, our services for those most vulnerable children in our city, those in our care, on the edge of care, or previously been in care. But I wondered if we should, in our priorities, and this is a question to the panel, really, the chairs of the panel, the joint commissioning, is one of our priorities should be campaigning for more funding for mental health in general. I don't necessarily just mean for Sheffield. I mean, we know that there isn't enough. There is a disparity between how much mental health services get in funding and how much normal services, health services get, and there's a big divide. And we know within that mental health funding, there's a big divide between children's and adults. So it's whether we need to campaign, put down one of our priorities is campaigning for more funding for mental health across the board. Also, maybe we should be working outside if there is a workforce issue. I certainly know there's an issue for speech therapy, speech and language therapists, because we need those, and we know we need them in some of our work with some of our most vulnerable children, and there aren't enough. And maybe we need to work with our universities to ask them, maybe, you know, we could get them involved as a partner to develop those staff, really, and to make sure they are really pushing those areas of learning going forward. And I think there's a big issue around thresholds that we've not addressed. And this is, as Lee would say, this is not taking anything away from everything you said, because I wrote a long list before you started talking, Heather. I wrote a long list of the things that I know we're doing as well. But the threshold issue is really still an issue, certainly between, I think, between community health and the more acute, between children's and adults there's a big threshold that sometimes isn't reached by adults, but nevertheless they need something, but they're not getting it. So there's something whether we should make sure we're not losing that really. And I won't say all the things I wrote down because you said a lot of them, but there are other things like online support for children, which we extended, and I think that's really important as well, because going forward this is going to be a big issue, isn't it? We all know that. It is at the moment, and it's hidden, and it will all come tumbling out. So and also I wanted to say all the work we've done on suicide prevention and our suicide pathway and things has been brilliant. And especially it seems a long time ago, but when STAMP, the young children and young people's group that work around mental health, came and gave us a workshop at the Health and Wellbeing Board, challenging us to do more things, and I think it's taken us a long time to get here, but I hope they would say things have improved since then too. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jackie. And I think it's always difficult, isn't it, with those points around, you're absolutely 100% correct around the funding, how we can turn that into something that we can actually use, given the restrictions that I know certainly the NHS colleague, we're a lot more free, aren't we, Jackie, you and I, about saying what we want about funding. I know that sometimes NHS faces around the table will have to hold their tongues a little bit with the funding, but I think it's absolutely true. But I think there is a real point here of how we can link this more widely to, you know, questions of resource, and actually challenging the strategy more widely here, not just saying here's our pot, let's deliver as well as we can, as integrated as we can, actually really challenging the edges, and take Sam's response to my question earlier around how far do you go to combine budgets and look widely, because actually you want to protect your existing resource and do the best with that, but also recognize that it's not sufficient. We need to go wide. We can widen that. So it is a really important point. And I see also, Jackie, your point thinking around thresholds and things in terms of the eligibility for services, but also once we've established eligibility, what chance of people actually getting that service decently and in a timely manner are so important. So I think we do need to look at some of those more kind of actuals in time to come. But unless there's any final comments, I'm sorry, a little push time. I think we really just want hearing a lot of thanks to Sam and Heather and your teams for everything today. I think it's exactly the kind of level we want to go to with more of these ambitions as well. So hopefully we'll see more of those in public in future as well as covering those at development sessions. So unless there's anything else I want to state, I'm going to thank everyone and note that. Is it anyone just chip in, please, if you want to say anything finally. Otherwise, we'll move on to talking of finance and that sort of thing. Sorry,
Can I
Jackie,
just say, I just want to say, I appreciate everything you said, and I think that this is a point, isn't it, where we were talking before about there's money in the system and it needs to be moved. I would say there isn't money in the system, and so when we're looking at things, it's not like we can move things around, you know, because we need all the money, and you know that's the point. That's the point and worry I have, and that's why I think we're going for extra money outside, aren't we, with all the funding bids that we're putting in? But maybe we can get the basics there a bit bigger. From
there's certainly nowhere that's wondering what to do with their money, is there? That's, I think, very, very true to say. No, well said, Jackie. So thank you, everybody. And we will. I know we're covering this, I think, probably at our next development session, or I think at another point very soon. So we will have further conversations and bring this back to a public meeting, no doubt, in future as well. So thank you both. Now, moving on, we've got the presentation on finance from Jackie Mills, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, George. I did circulate some slides with the papers pack, but I'm not proposing to project those. I just want to draw a few points out from that, if the committee is happy.
That's fine with me. I'll put the link in the chat if people want to see the link so people can view them if they haven't got them in front of them.
Okay, so the key points, and it probably is a bit of a theme of what we've talked about today. So the key points I wanted to draw out in relation to finance and how we've worked through the pandemic has been really building on joint work, joint relationships, making sure that both organisations were clearly sighted on the responses required to the pandemic and the changing circumstances, and ensuring that decisions could be made quickly and appropriately, and respond to the changing national guidance that we were receiving, which is fair to say has moved significantly and at speed throughout the whole period of the pandemic. One of the key principles we've maintained has been to be really transparent with each other, both in terms of the challenges, but also about the funding that's been presented to us. And it's fair to say that there's been quite a significant amount of funding that has been brought into the city to help us respond. I think there are long-lasting issues we will have to address. The funding is likely to be a challenge for us, but where we stand today, there has been a significant amount of funding brought in. And it's been really important that as two organisations we have come together to make sure that we make the best use of that funding, but also to avoid duplication. So that's been both duplication of funding, but also duplication of effort. So where one party has been leading on something, we've tried not to make sure, we have attempted to make sure that people don't duplicate that effort. And that's been enabled through the relationships that we've got and the communication channels that we have got. The funding that's come into the city is summarised on the last slide in the pack that we circulated, but I just really wanted to draw out some of the key areas that we've worked together on. So somebody mentioned earlier about the work, I think it was Jackie Drayton mentioned about the work around discharge from hospital, and we've done significant amounts of work to make sure that people can be discharged as soon as possible to the right place and got the right support around them. We've done very good joined up work around support to care home providers and to care providers, and working with those providers to make sure that they can support those clients that they are working with. Heather and Sam talked previously about the escalating mental health needs, and we've had to respond rapidly to being able to support that and support people in different ways, because obviously some of the traditional ways of supporting those people have not been appropriate. And finally, you know, a really big success story has been the joint work around delivery of the vaccination programme. You know, particularly the council have gone out of their way to just respond to what's needed, not waiting for central government guidance on what the response should be, but trying to do the right thing at the right time for people so that that vaccination programme can be delivered. So all of that we can summarise in financial terms, but I think the key point has been the theme of today, which is about how, when we work together and use our relationships and our people, we can get better outcomes than doing things on our own.
Thank you, Jackie, for that helpful update. Are there any questions for Jackie on the elements of within that presentation, or more broadly on the finance situation here? If not, thank you, Jackie, for that, absolutely. And I realize, I think we all realise that this year has been financially, it's been two halves, right? It's been, everyone has said, right, we need to get what we need done, no matter what the finance, but all the time I'm making no wider comments on the sustainability or the amount of finance going forward. It has become harder and harder to make those sums add up, and however much money comes forward to support services, those pressures always increase, and all the normal demographic pressures have been increasing, all while you know, unprecedented sums are spent on dealing with the emergency we're in. So I think we really have to thank Jackie, your team in the CCG, but also your equivalent teams in the council for really guiding us through this, because what we know here in this committee is that without that sound financial basis, it might not be enough money, but that knowledge that it's being sorted out and it's being planned really effectively, we won't be able to achieve anything, because let's face it, we have all the ambition in the world, we haven't got the money, and we haven't got the confidence that when we ask that money to be spent, it will be allocated in a really effective way. We can't do any of it. And so don't let anyone think that in the organisational finance isn't a really key part in keeping people healthy and health inequality, because ultimately it is money in the right or wrong place and being spent effectively, ineffectively, that makes that difference. So so thank you to Jackie and your teams, and also thank you to those that aren't here today from the council doing the very difficult, probably more difficult ever financial point. Terry, do you have a point you want to make on this?
Yeah, again, it's to echo what you're saying, George, to say thank you to the finance teams. I am always grateful that there are people with the qualifications to understand some of the complexities of the funding streams and the money, and to be able to present that back to us mere mortals in a way that's understandable. So big thumbs up to the teams there, and in particular in terms of the way that you've integrated it. So from my understanding, and Jackie will tell me if I'm wrong here, but the point of a good finance team is to enable decision makers to make better decisions about what they need to do. And I really believe that the integration, that working together of the finance teams from our City Council and from our CCG has enabled us as a system in Sheffield to make better decisions. And I really just want to say thank you for that, Jackie, and to Eugene in the council and to all of the staff that you work with.
Thank you. And you've got Jackie actually now just popped up my open corner.
Sorry, just to say just one thing. I just want to say what I was really pleased to read. Thanks. Added my thanks to everybody that that you're part of the role is not ensuring that these vital resources are not being duplicated. That's an important part, isn't it? And making sure that it's going to additional stuff that we need to do. And all credit to you, whoever's been on the group that's been meeting weekly since March 2020. I mean, it's Herculean task, I think it's fantastic. Well done. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. What I've noticed somehow is that I have failed to take us through the schedule of public meetings, which is a very simple item. But we have 4 public meetings listed for the upcoming times, which are all on Mondays in June, September, December, and March, going through till 2022. Running at this time. Is that something that can be accepted by everybody? I mean, we can't formally make a decision here. Is that okay with everybody as a working proposal going forward? Apologies for missing that, everybody.
We are core at chair, so we can make that decision.
Oh, we are core, are we right now? Yeah. Okay, sorry, I just must have added up wrong. That's fine. Well, I'll happily accept them then. Brilliant. Sorry about missing them, everybody. Really, then it just goes on to any other business. I haven't been notified of any urgent business, have we? But Terry, you've got your hand up, so would you like to have some unnotified urgent business?
Yeah, I apologise for these unnotified bits. They've bits that have been springing into my mind as we've been through the meeting. So I'll try and keep them really brief. The first one that we've touched on already, but I think really as a committee, we probably want to give thanks to everyone working in health and social care for the delivery of that COVID vaccination. We've hit our targets in Sheffield, and we have been recognised as one of the better performing areas in the country. So I think that is something we should really be thankful for. The second bit is really focusing on inequalities and the role of this committee. So I think as a committee, we probably want to recognise, as we do with other groups, that is LGBT History Month, and to give assurance to the public that this committee considers that in its planning when we consider equality and inequality in the services that we bring together.
Thank you, Terry. And I think that's I think second point, I think we've happily recognised. I think what we say is that there is a list of many high quality online events naturally that are happening both in Sheffield, but naturally now we don't need to be tied in any way to Sheffield boundaries, happening as part of our LGBT History Month. A lot that do a lot of events that are taking place have a very strong link to many items on the agenda today, and many of the things that we are dealing with as a committee, particularly mental health. And I've seen some very interesting things. I don't know the way we can circulate or aid through our networks the dissemination of information there, but anything we can do there is, I think, a very good thing to do. Right. Is there anything else we want to deal with? Anything anyone wants to raise? If not, it really only remains to say that we will next be meeting and one of these public meetings, as we've just agreed, on the Monday 28th of June. So thank you all for attending today, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.